Synapse Analytics is a powerful analytics tool in Microsoft's Azure cloud platform. In this video, we're going to look at the Synapse Analytics pipeline. We'll identify each step from consuming the data from a source to transforming the data for analytics purposes. Synapse Analytics supports an extract, load, and transform, or ELT pipeline. Data that resides in some external data store, such as SQL Server or Cosmos DB, is extracted from the source, meaning a copy of the data is made that's consumable by Synapse Analytics. That extracted data is then loaded into a dedicated SQL pool, which is Synapse Analytics' equivalent of an internal SQL database. Once the data is in a Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool, queries can then be run on it, transforming the data for reports or dashboards, or to feed to other analysis tools. So the first step of the Synapse Analytics pipeline actually happens external to the Synapse Analytics instance. Before it can be ingested, it needs to be put in a format compatible with ingestion. Regardless of the data source, be it SQL Server, Cosmos DB, Azure Table Storage, or any other data store, a service must translate the data into text files. Now, there are many formats compatible with Synapse Analytics, such as Hadoop file formats or JSON. But one of the most popular is comma-separated values or CSV files. These files contain rows of data as text, each data value separated by a comma or some other delimiter. Once the data has been copied into a text file, such as a CSV file, it must then be stored in what is typically called a landing zone. That is, a place where Synapse Analytics can ingest it. Synapse Analytics can ingest data from many data stores, including Azure Blob Storage and Azure Data Lake Store. Prior to ingesting data into Synapse Analytics, you must define tables in Synapse Analytics to store the incoming data. And the schema of these tables may be different than that in the source or landing zone data store. Somewhere along the pipeline from the source to the Synapse Analytics tables, the data must be prepared, meaning it must be put in the form that best suits the analytics. For instance, the source data might be time series temperature data from a refrigerator unit, but for analysis, you only care about the hourly average temperatures. The data can be aggregated before being loaded into Synapse Analytics. This can occur anywhere along the pipeline, from source data to loaded data. But it's best to perform this preparation earlier rather than later. For instance, it's much easier to aggregate data in a source SQL database instance than once it's stored as text data in the landing zone data store. The next step in the pipeline is the ingestion, or loading the data into Synapse Analytics from the landing zone data store. This is typically done with Azure Data Factory, and there are several options here, two of which are optimized. You can use polybase, which uses Transact SQL to define not only the loading tables, but also some external tables, which are like views into the incoming data that help with preparation and efficiency. A newer feature is the copy statement in Azure Data Factory that's more flexible in many ways than polybase, and may very well supersede polybase in the future for the standard method for moving data into Synapse Analytics. Once data is in the Synapse Analytics SQL pool staging tables, queries run on the Synapse Analytics instance can then transform the data. This step typically transforms the data into a form that's meaningful for business analysis. And finally, this transformed data is moved to production tables to be consumed by downstream analysis, such as business reports. This is done with an insert into and select statement, where the insert into statement determines where the data is going to be placed in production, and the select statement transforms the data. In a standard use case, this may be a step that queries the data and places the results on a quarterly sales report. Azure Data Factory can be used as an integral part of any data pipeline strategy in Azure, since it runs activities that move data from source to destination, as well as supporting activities for preparing that data. In this video, we're going to review how Azure Data Factory works. First, Data Factory has a concept of a pipeline. A pipeline is a logical grouping of activities that execute tasks, such as moving data or transforming data. These activities are connected, so the output of one activity serves as the input of the next, supporting the flow of data. The activities in the pipeline are grouped because they serve one logical function. For example, a pipeline might contain activities for moving landed data from Azure Blob Storage to staging tables in Synapse Analytics, while also aggregating the data as part of the larger pipeline for serving aggregated sales reports. So let's take a look at the fundamentals of how Azure Data Factory works. At the heart of Data Factory is the pipeline management. This logically groups activities that serve a single purpose into pipelines. You can think of activities or the steps of a pipeline similar to steps of a recipe. Data Factory supports three main types of activities. Activities that move data, and these types of activities can both consume data from a wide variety of data stores as well as write data to a variety of stores. There are data transformation activities, which change the data somehow. For instance, there's a databricks activity that allows Python code to run which can transform the data. Perhaps a pipeline that's designed to obfuscate keywords in text messages could consume messages from a source data store, run a databricks activity to recognize and obfuscate the keywords, and then write the modified messages to a destination data store. This would be three activities representing a single pipeline. And finally, there are control activities, which allow for logical control such as filtering and looping. For example, the text message pipeline just described could consume several text messages at once, and a control activity could loop to process each message. As briefly mentioned, Data Factory supports a number of data stores for both source and destination. For example, one common combination is to consume data from Azure Blob Storage, which is a popular landing zone data store, and write the data to Synapse Analytics, a popular data consumer for analytics processing. Data Factory contains a copy tool which lets you easily configure a pipeline between a source data store, such as Azure Blob Storage, and a destination data store, such as Synapse Analytics. There are many different data transformation activities available in Data Factory, which allow you a great amount of flexibility. Some of these are data flow, which allows you to graphically design a data pipeline; Hive, which allows you to run Hive queries on HT Insight clusters; the stored procedure activity to run a stored procedure in a database, such as SQL Server; a USQL activity for data lake analytics; and with the Databricks activity, you can run Databricks notebooks, jar files, and Python code. Azure Data Factory offers visual wizards for setting up pipelines and associated activities. Both pipelines and activities have a standard JSON format. The pipeline JSON format includes the name and description of a pipeline, an array of activity objects, and other details such as parameters and the maximum allowed concurrency in the pipeline. The objects in the activities array of the pipeline JSON themselves have activity details like name and description, the activity type, the properties that go with the type, and the name of the linked service describing the external data source. In the description of the pipeline JSON, I briefly mentioned a concurrency setting. In a pipeline, activities may run concurrently or in parallel, which speeds up runtime and makes the pipeline more efficient. What can be run concurrently will depend on the dependencies of the various activities in the pipeline. You should keep concurrency in mind when designing your data pipelines. And finally, once your pipelines are defined, they can be scheduled. Perhaps you have a pipeline for quarterly reports, and to avoid processing a large amount of data once a quarter, you could schedule the data ingestion to take place once a week. Schedules are triggered for pipelines in different manners. One common trigger is a calendar-style trigger. For example, you may want to ingest quarterly sales data into production every Friday at 5 p.m. You can also trigger pipelines to run on demand by clicking a button. Azure Data Factory is a great service for moving data around. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to set up Azure Data Factory. I'll show you how to set up a data pipeline in that instance to copy data from an input blob storage container to an output blob storage container. This will show you the basics of how to set up a pipeline, and this knowledge can be extended to move or transform data between other types of sources and destinations. Now note that I'm going to be performing this demonstration as a subscription administrator. In order to create an Azure Data Factory instance, you need to be either a subscription administrator or you have to have either contributor or owner role in the subscription. Further, to create sub-resources in the Azure Data Factory, such as the pipeline components, you must have the Data Factory contributor role. As an administrator, I automatically inherit that role. So the first step I'm going to do to create this from scratch is to create a resource group. So in Azure Portal, I'll go to my resource groups and I'll click Add. Now, I'll just choose the subscription I have, which is free trial, but if you're doing this, you can choose any subscription. And I'm just going to call this Demo Data Factory as the resource group name. And I'll just default the region. Click Review and Create, and then click Create. Now that I have my resource group, I'll click on my resource group, and under Overview, I'll click Add at the top. Now what I want to do is I want to create a blob storage, and this is going to be both my source and my destination for my pipeline. So I'll just type in storage, and choose Storage Account, and then click Create. And under the basics for Create Storage Account, it's already chosen my subscription and it's already chosen my resource group. So I need to give it a storage account name. So I'll just call it Blob Storage, and that's probably not going to work. Yeah, because it needs only lowercase. So I'll just call it Blob Storage. And that's already taken, not surprisingly. So I'm just going to add some numbers on the end to make it unique. Blob Storage 266. I'm just going to default the location, default everything else, performance, account kind. It's a general purpose. I'll click Review plus Create and hit Create. All right, so that's created. So now I'm going to go to Resource, and I'm actually going to back up and go to my resource groups and click Demo Data Factory. And there I see my blob storage. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my blob storage, and I'm going to click on Containers in the overview, and I'm going to create some blob containers. So at the top I'm going to click Container, and I'm going to create a new container, and I'm going to call it Source. This is going to be the source container for my pipeline. I hit Create, and I'm going to create another one by clicking plus container at the top, and I'm going to call this Destination for my pipeline. Now, what we need is something to move between the source and the destination. So I'm going to upload a JSON file, which is going to be what we're going to move with our pipeline. So if I click on the source container, and at the top I click Upload, and I'm going to select a file that I have called demo.json. And I'll click Upload. Okay, so that is now uploaded into my source container. Now I'm going to go back to my resource groups. I'm going to go to Demo Data Factory, and I'm going to click Add at the top, and what we're going to do now is add our data factory. So I'm going to type in Data Factory and choose Data Factory, click Create. Now under the basics of Data Factory, I'm just going to default things. It already chose my resource group because it's the only one I have. subscription. I just need to give it a name, so I'm just going to call it Data Factory. That probably won't work because, yeah, that already exists. So I'll add my dummy number at the end, 266. That makes it valid. I'm just going to default the version, hit review and create. And there's one step I have to do for Git configuration before it'll allow me to create it. If I go back to Git configuration at the top, I have to click Configure Git Later because I don't have a Git repository to connect to Data Factory. So I need to tell it that I don't want to connect that right now. Click Review and Create and click Create. So it'll take a few seconds, but it'll create my Data Factory. There we go. Now if I go back to my resource group, I now see, oh, it might take a few seconds. Okay, it took a few seconds, but my Data Factory has shown up in the resource group. So I have my blob storage, remember, with my source container and destination container. We have a JSON file in the source container. And now I'm going to use the Data Factory to create a pipeline that moves that source JSON to the destination. So I'll click on my Data Factory. And under Data Factory and Overview, I want to click Author and Monitor. And this will take me to the UI that allows me to set up my pipeline. Now in this demonstration, I'm going to set up my pipeline manually. So on the left, there's some options. There's one called Manage. If I click on that, there's a section that says Linked Services. I want to click New and create a new linked service. Now what a linked service does is it connects to your data source. So I have options for data store. I'm going to choose Azure Blob Storage because that's where my data is. Click Continue. And I'm just going to let it do the default name, Azure Blob Storage 1. That's fine. And I have to set up the Azure subscription here. So I'm going to select my free trial under Account Selection Method. And storage account name is my blob storage. So this will connect it to my blob storage. At the bottom, there's a button that says Test Connection. So if I click that, I can see that whether it works. Connection successful. So now, when I click Create, my Data Factory now has a linked service that connects it to my blob storage. So it knows how to talk to the blob storage that I want to interact with. All data stores that I want to interact with, I have to create a linked service to. Now the next step is to create data sets. So on the left, if I go up to Author, which is a little pencil, and I click that, there's Factory Resources. And this is where you want to create the parts of your pipeline. So if I click the little plus, which says Add New Resource, and I choose Data Set, I'm going to choose my source and my destination data sets. I'm going to create those in the Data Factory. So I'm going to choose Azure Blob Storage once again and click Continue. And now it asks me for the format of my data. Now, if I was to transform the data, I would want to give it the format JSON because perhaps I'd want to change the JSON before I put it into the destination. But in this case, we're just copying, so I can choose binary. In other words, I don't really care what the format is, just treat it like a binary file. Click Continue. I have to choose the linked service, of course, to tell it where it is. And I have to give it a path. And there's a little folder beside the path so I can choose, I can see the contents of my blob storage. And I can choose source, double click on that, and I can choose my demo.json. That is the data set that I want to link to. Hit OK, and hit OK. And now I have, to the left, if you see under Factory Resources, under Data Sets, I now have a data set. It's called binary 1 by default, so I'm just going to change that to source. That's my source data set. Now I have to create another one for my destination to tell it basically where to put the data. So I'll hit the plus under Factory Resources again, click Data Set. Again, choose Azure Blob Storage because that's where my destination is. Again, I'll choose binary and click Continue. I will choose the same link service because in this case it's going to be in the same blob storage. And I will click the little folder and I will choose destination and click OK. And click OK again. That will create my second data set, which I will call destination. So now we have our data sets set up. The final bit is to actually set up our pipeline. So under Factory Resources, I'm going to click plus again and click Pipeline. Now Pipeline gives you a whole bunch of different functions that you can do with data. So you can do more than just move data. You can transform data. You can perform functions and all sorts of analysis on it. I'm going to open up Move and Transform and click Copy Data. Actually, I'm not going to click it. I'm going to drag it. And now I have a Copy Data method, which I can give details to. Down at the bottom, it says Source and Sync, and you see there's a little red 1. That means I have to set some things up. So if I click Source, I choose the source data set. In this case, it's the data set I called Source. Now, I'm not going to set anything else. There's other options I can set for this source, but I'm just going to leave it at that. And under Sync, I can choose the Sync data set, which is Destination. And now, I am going to publish this pipeline. So at the very top of the UI, there's a Publish All button, and it has a little 3. That means there's 3 things I've set up, 2 data sets in a pipeline, which I haven't published yet. So I'll click that, Publish, and click Publish at the bottom under Publish All. So that's now deploying my changes and publishing that pipeline. Okay, so Publish Successful. So now that I've created my pipeline, I can run it. Now you can click Add Trigger at the top, and you can add a trigger that triggers this on a schedule. I'm just going to run it right now. So if I click Add Trigger, I can click Trigger Now. And under Pipeline Run, click OK. And now it says Succeeded. So now if I go to Monitor on the left-hand side, and if I go to Triggered under Pipeline Runs, I see that I have one run that's successful. Now, if I go back to Azure and I take a look, I should be able to see that my JSON file is moved. So if I go to my resource groups, Demo Data Factory, Blob Storage, and I go to Containers, now if I look at my source, I should see my JSON file. That's where we put it. And if I look in my destination, there's the JSON file. It's been copied. So in conclusion, I've shown you how to set up an Azure Data Factory and create a pipeline for moving data between a source and a destination. This functionality is often used to move data in a data analytics solution. In this video, I'm going to show you the easy way to set up Azure Data Factory to copy data from a source to a destination using the built-in Copy Data tool. So in the portal here, I'm just going to go to my resource groups, and I have a resource group set up called Demo Data Factory. And you'll see that I have some resources set up. I have a storage account called Blob Storage and a Data Factory. Now I've set up my Blob Storage for this, so let me show you what I have. If I open up my Blob Storage, I'll go to Containers. And under Containers, I have 2 containers, a source and a destination. So what we're going to do today is use Data Factory to copy a JSON file from the source to the destination. Now if I open up my source container, here's my demo.json. And if I go back to my destination container, you'll see that it's empty. So when we're done, there should be a JSON file here, which was the copy JSON file. So now if I go back to my resource group and I click on my Data Factory, in the overview of my Data Factory, I should be able to click Author and Monitor to go to the UI. Now here I am in the UI, and on the Let's Get Started page, there are a lot of different tools here that help you through some standard activities. The one we're going to use today is Copy Data. So I'm going to click on that, and it opens up a wizard that's really nice because it steps me through the whole steps of copying data. Now under the main properties, I'm just going to let the task name be default. I'm going to leave it on Run Once Now. So it's only going to run this copy activity once, as opposed to scheduling it. Click Next. Now I have to set up a source data store. Now this is the connection to my Blob Storage. I'll click Create New Connection, and I'll choose Azure Blob Storage and hit Continue. Now I have to give it the account information and my storage account information. So Azure subscription, free trial, storage account name, blob storage. Now I'll click test connection at the bottom and it'll tell me whether it connected. Connection successful. So I'll click create. Now that's created my new connection called Azure Blob Storage 1. Now I'll click next. Now I choose the input file or folder. There's a nice browse button here that I'll click, and I can choose my source folder, double click that, and I will choose my JSON file. That's what I want to copy. So I'll click choose. Now I'm going to check binary copy because I want to treat it like a binary file. During copy, I don't want to have to look at the properties of the JSON file to decide what to copy. I'm just going to copy the whole file. So choose binary. Click next. Now my destination data store could be different than the source, but it's not. It's the same blob storage. So I'll choose that and click next. And I choose the output file or folder. I'll click the browse button again. And this time I choose my destination folder as the output folder. Click choose and click next. Now there's some additional settings, but I'm just going to click next on those and leave them as default. And here's the summary. Azure Blob Storage to Azure Blob Storage. And it shows me details about my properties, my source and destination. And I have some copy settings. So I'll click next. And now it's validating the data sets, creating the pipeline, and running the pipeline. And it's all completed. So that's all there is to it. It's just copied all the data. Now I'll click finish. So that's the nice copy data tool. And let me show you what it actually did. You could actually set this all up manually, but the copy data tool is a lot easier. So on the left, if I click on author, which is a little pencil, I've created a new pipeline and also 2 data sets. And that was all part of the wizard. Also on the left, if I choose manage, there is what's called a linked service, and that is a connection to my blob storage, which we initially set up. So all that was set up for me. Now let's go back to the portal, and I'll just go to my resource group, and let's take a look at what happens. So if I open up my blob storage, and I go to containers, now first I'll go to my source. Remember, my source had the demo JSON, and I'm just going to open it up to show you what's in it so that we can verify the contents were copied correctly. So if I open up the demo.json and I click edit, it has a name, John Doe, and an age 25. It's just a simple JSON object. Now let's take a look at the destination container. Now remember, this was empty before, and now it has demo.json, so that's been copied. Now if I click on that and I choose edit, I see that the contents are indeed the same as in the source. Name, John Doe, and age 25. So in conclusion, the Azure Data Factory UI contains a copy data tool that streamlines the setup of a linked connection, data sets, and a pipeline for copying data from a source to a destination. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use Azure Data Factory to move data from blob storage to a Synapse Analytics instance using the polybase option. Now, polybase is Transact SQL that extracts data from external data sources. It's very efficient at combining data from those external sources. So I'm starting off here in Azure Portal, and I'm just going to create a resource group. If I click on resource groups and I click add, and I'm going to create a resource group called demo polybase. Review and click create. Now, if I go to my resource group, so the first thing we need is a source, which is going to be our blob storage. So I'm going to click on add and type in storage. Choose a storage account and click create. So it's already got my subscription and resource group chosen. I'm going to choose this as my storage account name, demo storage, and I just add 266 to make it unique. And I'll let everything else default. Click review and create. So that'll just take a few seconds to create the storage. Okay, so that's finished. So now if I go back to my resource group, demo polybase, there it is. And I'm just going to click on it. And what I'm going to do now is set up some blob containers. So I'm going to go to containers. I'm actually going to create one blob container called source. And that's going to be our source JSON that we're going to copy into Synapse Analytics. So I'll open up that source container. At the top, I'll click upload. And I'll choose to select a file. And I have one called demo.json. So if I open that up and click upload, I'll just show you quickly what demo.json has in it. If I click it and click edit, it has a simple JSON object. It has a name, John Doe, and an age 25. So now I'm going to go back to my resource group and click add. The next thing we're going to create is our Synapse Analytics instance. So we'll type Synapse and choose Azure Synapse Analytics and click create. Okay, so it's already set up to my free trial subscription. And I can choose my resource group, demo polybase. And I'm going to type in a workspace name. So this is just going to be Synapse 266, just to make it unique. That's great. And I have to give it an account name and a file system name. Now I'm going to create new ones. These are data lake storage accounts that it needs. So I'll just call this account 266, just using the 266 to be unique. And file 266. Okay. And I'll also click on the assign myself to storage blob data contributor role. Now on security, I'm going to go to the security tab, and I want to give the SQL admin user on my Synapse instance a unique password that I know. You can always reset this password after you've created the instance, but I just like to do it right here. Now I'll hit review and create. That's great. I'll hit create. Now that'll take a few seconds to create my Synapse instance. Okay, so that's complete. So if I go to my resource group, I now have a Synapse 266 workspace. And the final thing I'm going to create is the actual Azure Data Factory that's going to tie these together. So I click add, and I'll type in Data Factory. Choose the Data Factory, click Create, and it fills in my resource group. I'm going to give it a name of Data Factory 266. And I'm going to also go to Git Configuration at the top, and I'm going to click Configure Git Later because I don't need a Git repository. So I'll click Review and Create, and click Create. And we'll just wait for that to finish. And now that's done. So if I go to my resource group, I now have a data factory. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to create a destination database in my Synapse. So if I open up Synapse, on the overview, you'll find under Getting Started, Open Synapse Studio. So click Open. And this will take you to the Azure Synapse Analytics UI. Now in here, I can create databases. So if I go to Manage, and a database, it's actually called a SQL pool. If I click New, I'm going to create a dedicated SQL pool, and I'm just going to call it Demo. Review and Create, and I'll click Create. Okay, so the demo database is created. So now on the left, if I go to Data, you'll see under Databases, I'll just click Refresh, and there's now a database called Demo. And if you take a look at the folders here, I have tables, which you'd expect. I also have something called external tables and external resources. Now, external tables are used by Polybase. And what they are basically is like temporary staging tables that Polybase defines, which make it easier to join data when it's coming into the database. Now, what we need to do is we need to create a table to hold the data that we're going to bring in. So I'm going to click New Table, and this creates a query for me. And I'm going to call my table Users because my JSON represents a user. And Users is going to have a name field that can be a string. and also an age field, which is an integer. So I'll click run on that. Oh, I also have to adjust the column name in the hash because there's no col1. We will use name as our hash. Run. And executed successfully. So now if I refresh the tables, I have a users table with columns, name and age. So that's going to be my destination in the demo table. So if I go back to the portal for a second, and I'm going to go to my resource group, and I'm going to go to my data factory. And now we're going to set up the actual pipeline. So if I click on author and monitor under overview, it opens up the Azure Data Factory UI. And I'm going to click copy data, and we're going to step through and see how to set this up with polybase. So first of all, under the first properties of the copy data tool, I'll just leave the task name default, and we're going to run it once. So I'll leave run once now. Click next. Now I need to create a source data store. So I'll hit create new connection. Now my source data store is blob storage, Azure blob storage, and I'll click continue. And I need to give it some information here under account, my Azure subscription, and the storage account name, which is demo storage. And I'm just going to click test connection at the bottom. And that's successful, so I'll hit create. So that's my blob storage. Now I'm going to click next. Now I choose a file or folder, so I am going to actually choose the JSON file and click next. Now for file format settings, it already knows it's a JSON format. I'm going to leave it at JSON format. And you notice at the bottom it gives me a preview. And if I click schema, I can see it's picked up the schema of that JSON format. The name is a string, age is an integer. So I'll click next. Now it needs a destination data store. So that's my Synapse Analytics. So I need to create a new connection. And I'll type in Synapse, and I get Azure Synapse Analytics. Click that and continue. Now I need to give it my Azure subscription. I need to choose the server, Synapse 266, and I should see my database demo. There we go. And SQL authentication. So the username is SQL admin user. That's the default admin user. And my password is just the password that I gave my Synapse instance when I created it. That's the connection. That's successful, so I'll hit create. Okay, so I have that chosen, and I'll click next. Now I want to use existing table, and I want to choose DBO user. So this is a table mapping. It's asking me when I get data from blob storage, what's the destination table? That's why we had to create the table in Synapse Analytics. So it's users. I'll click next. So you'll see these field names are the JSON field names, and if I scroll to the right, I can choose column names in the destination table. So I'm going to map name to name and age to age. And click next. And you notice on advanced settings, the copy method is polybase. And you have to have enable staging checked. And we have to choose a staging account. It uses a staging account to store the data temporarily while it loads it with polybase. So I'm just going to choose the Azure Blob Storage, and I'll choose the same source container, and it will just use that as temporary storage. Click next. So you'll see that in my summary, I'm going from Azure Blob Storage to Azure Blob Storage as a staging table, and then it's going to use polybase to bring it into Azure Synapse Analytics. So if I click next, it's going to do all of this. It's creating the data sets, creating the pipeline, and running the pipeline. And it says it was successful. So I'll click finish. So now what I'm going to do is go back to the portal. If I go to the resource group and we go to our Synapse, and under overview, I click open Synapse Studio. We'll just take a look at the database and see if our data has been copied. So on the left, I'll click data, and I'll open up the database demo and open up the tables. Now, first thing I want to show you is if I open up external tables, there's nothing there. So as I mentioned, polybase creates external tables. but Data Factory automatically cleans those up afterwards for you. So if I click on Users and I do a new SQL script, I can select the top 100 rows. And you see that John Doe is in my table, age 25, name John Doe. So just to summarize, what we've done here is we've used Azure Data Factory with the polybase option in order to copy data using temporary external tables from Azure Blob Storage to Synapse Analytics. In this video, I'm going to show you how to run SSIS packages in Azure Data Factory. Now, SSIS stands for SQL Server Integration Services, and it's a SQL Server solution for data workflows. Now, I'm not going to go over the details of SSIS in this video, but I will mention that SSIS packages can be created in Visual Studio, which has a visual drag and drop interface to create a workflow, and allows you to write code for the steps of that workflow. The resulting SSIS package can then be imported into a SQL Server instance, including an Azure SQL database. Today I'm going to show you how you can invoke an instance of the SSIS runtime environment from within Azure Data Factory, and then create a pipeline that can run an SSIS package directly from an Azure SQL database. So I'm in the portal here, and I'm going to create a new resource group for us to work in. So I'll click Add. And I'm just going to call this SSIS Demo. Click Review and Create, and click Create. Now, in my resource group, the first thing I'm going to do is create a SQL database. So I'll click Add, and I'll type in SQL Database. So I'll create a SQL database instance, click Create, and I'll just fill in the basics here. I'll just call it Database, and I'll put some numbers on the end to make it unique. I need to create a new SQL Server instance. Okay, so I'm going to give it a simple server name. I'll just call it SQL Server, and give it some numbers to make it unique. And you have to put an administrator login in, so I always use my own bbrooks26, and I have to have a password for that server admin, and click OK. And I'm just going to accept the defaults here and click Review and Create, and click Create. So that'll just take a few minutes. Okay, so that's complete. So now if I go back to the resource group, I now have a SQL Server instance and my SQL database instance. Now, if you're going to use Azure Data Factory to run an SSIS package, then your SSIS package would have to be imported into this database. Now, I'm not going to do that today, but I'm going to show you the steps for connecting this to Azure Data Factory. So I need to create an Azure Data Factory, so I'll click Add, and choose Data Factory, and hit Create. And I'll just give it a simple name, Data Factory 266, Review and Create. So I need to go to Git Configuration and choose Configure Git Later, because I don't want a Git repository right now. I'll click Create, and that'll create our Data Factory. Now that'll take a few seconds, so we'll just wait for that. Okay, and that's complete. So let's go back to our resource group. Now my Data Factory has shown up here. So what I'm going to do is click on Data Factory and click on Author and Monitor. This will open up the Data Factory UI. So here we are in Azure Data Factory. So I'm going to create the SSIS runtime environment. If I just go to Manage on the left-hand side, and then on the left under Connections, click Integration Runtime, and I'm going to create an integration runtime. So I'll click New. And you see it has the option of Azure SSIS, lift and shift existing SSIS packages. So that's what I want to do. I'll click Continue, and I get the standard. I'm just going to allow the defaults. Click Continue. And now I have to choose the database that's going to have my SSIS packages in it. It's already chosen it for me because it's the only one. The location was East US is where it is, and it's the SQL Server 266.database.windows.net. I just have to give it the admin username and password, which I set up. So that was my bbrooks26. And I can choose a service tier. I'm just going to allow it to default. Click Continue. And there's some other advanced settings. I'm just going to click Continue and Create. And this creates my SSIS integration runtime. Now I'm going to pause here because it takes a while to start this. It could take up to 20 or 30 minutes. Okay, luckily that didn't take 20 minutes. It's started. As you see, it's running. So what I can do now is I can create a pipeline, and I can use this integration runtime to run SSIS packages. So if I click on Author on the left, the pencil, and under Factory Resources, I'm just going to click the ellipses beside Pipelines and choose New Pipeline. And then under General, under Activities, there's an option to execute SSIS package. If I drag that into the workflow, now I can execute an SSIS package from my SQL Server. So if I click on Settings below, it's going to ask me to choose my runtime. So I'm going to choose my integration runtime one that I just created. And I'll show you the options here. You have package location, so the database that it's connected to, or you can choose a package store embedded package, so you can actually embed the package right in here. In fact, you can do an upload. So this actually uploads a package. So you can upload a package from your local machine. And you can also choose a file system, which will use a file share. So if you have a file share set up, you can access the SSIS packages from it. So these are all your options to run SSIS packages in Data Factory. And once you have this set up, if I click Add Trigger, I could run Trigger Now, or you can set up a new schedule and schedule this. So in conclusion, I've shown you how to set up Azure Data Factory to consume an SSIS package from an Azure SQL database instance. In this video, I'm going to show you how to run Azure Databricks in Azure Data Factory. Now, Azure Databricks allow you to execute script, such as Python, as part of your data pipeline. So I'm starting fresh here in the portal. I'm going to go to my resource groups, and I'm going to create a brand new resource group for us to use. And I'm going to call it Databricks Demo. Click Review and Create, and click Create. So going into my resource group now, Databricks Demo, the resources we need to do this are a Data Factory and an Azure Databricks instance. So I'm going to click Add, and the first thing I'll add is the Data Factory. So I type in Data Factory, and I choose Data Factory, click Create, and I'm just going to give it a name, and I'm just going to keep it simple. Data Factory, and I add 266 to make it unique. It's just a random number. Review and Create. And I also have to go to Git Configuration and click Configure Git Later because I don't want a Git repository right now. Click Review and Create and hit Create. So that'll just take a few seconds to deploy. Okay, so that's deployed. So now if I go to my resource group again, Databricks Demo, and click Add one more time, now I'm looking to create a Databricks instance. So Azure Databricks, click Create, and I need to give it a name, and again I'm going to keep it simple, Databricks, and I just add a number at the end to make it unique. Click Review and Create, and click Create, and wait for that to finish. Okay, so that's complete. So now if I go back to my resource group again, and I'm going to go into Databricks, and what we need to do is we need to set up a Databricks notebook. So I'm going to click on the overview Launch Workspace. This opens up the workspace for Databricks. Okay, so here in Databricks, under Common Tasks, I can click New Notebook. And I can just give it a name. This is just going to be a demo underscore notebook. This is going to be a demo notebook. Hit create. And I'm just going to put something very simple, just so we have a notebook so I can show you what it looks like in Data Factory. So I'm just going to go print hello world. This is the Python notebook. And now I'm going to exit. So you see in my workspace, if I take a look at my workspace, I see my demo underscore notebook under my user. So if I just go back to the portal, what I'm going to do is go back to my resource group and now go into Data Factory. And I'm going to show you how you tie in databricks in Data Factory. So I'll click Author and Monitor on the overview. That takes me to the UI. Now, what I want to do is I want to create a pipeline and use my Azure Databricks. So if I go to Author on the left-hand side, it's a big pencil. And under Factory Resources, I hit the plus and I choose Pipeline. And it'll create a new pipeline. And what I can do is open up Databricks. It's an option under Activities in Pipeline. And so you see there's a few options, and I'll step you through some of the options. You can run a notebook, you can run a jar file, or you can run Python script directly. So if I choose notebook, I have some options here to load. Now if I go to Azure Databricks, there's a linked service that I need. So I'm going to hit new because I need to link Data Factory to the Databricks instance. So if I click new, I need to give it a few things. Under Azure subscription, I give it my subscription, and I have to choose the workspace, and it's my Databricks 266. Now select cluster. I'm going to go new job cluster. Now what this does is it'll bring up a cluster, which takes a few minutes. It'll run and then it'll shut it down. Now I'm actually not going to run it today because I'm not going to get into running the actual Databrick. I'm just showing you how to set it up so you can. So you could go new job cluster and it could run it once, or you might have an interactive cluster that's existing and you could use that, or an instance pool. Now it needs authentication, so I need an access token. Now I can get that from Databricks. So if I go back to my Databricks screen, under my user, under user settings, I can hit generate new token and hit generate, and it creates a new token for me. So I can just copy that, and then I'll go back to my Data Factory and paste that access token in. Now you need to choose some things like cluster version, cluster node type, Python version. Now it depends on what you're running. I'm not going to explain all of these because that's not in the scope of this, but I'm just going to choose some just to show you how it works. So I'll choose the very first one, 5.5 LTS. I'll choose a standard. And Python version, I'll just leave. You would set whatever Python version you want to run. Worker options, fixed or auto scaling, I'll just leave one worker and hit create. So this creates a link to my Azure Databricks. Now if I go under settings on my pipeline, I now can browse my notebooks. So if I click browse, I can double click on users. And now that I'm linked to it, I can go into my user and I can choose my demo notebook and hit OK. And you can set parameters, and there's some other settings, but those are the main ones. Is you can choose the notebook, and if you wanted to run it, you can go add trigger and you could trigger it now. Okay, now there's other options here. If I delete the notebook and I drag a Python script, it's the same idea. I choose the link, and then under settings, I can choose a Python file. And same thing with the jar file. So you can do notebooks, jar files, or Python files. So in conclusion, what I've shown you here is how to use Data Factory pipelines to run Databricks as either running a notebook or a jar file or a Python script. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to copy an entire blob container containing blobs with a common schema into a table in a Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool. So here in Azure Portal, I have a resource group set up and I want to step you through it. It's called Demo Polybase. And I have some resources set up here. There's one called Demo Storage 266. This is my storage account that has my blobs in it. It's the source. The destination is the Synapse workspace, and specifically, there's a dedicated SQL pool set up called Demo, and that has a table which will be our destination. I'll show you in a minute. And we have a data factory. So if I open up my demo storage account, let me show you the blobs I have set up for our source. If I go to containers, there's a container called source. If I open that up, I have 4 JSON files. And let me just show you their contents. So if I click edit on the first one, you see it has 2 fields, a name and an age. So name is John Doe, age is 25 in this case. If I go to the second one, it has the same schema, same properties. Name is Sarah Perkins, age is 54, so just different values. If I go to user 3, this is Bob Dylan, 75. And if I go to user 4, this is Alice Jones, age 18. So these are the 4 JSON files, and what I'm going to do is bulk copy those to be records in a table in Synapse Analytics. So if I go back to my resource group, let me show you the destination table. If I click on Synapse 266, my workspace, and I go to Open Synapse Studio, and on the left, I'll just click Data, and I'll open up Databases, and I have my database demo, and in Demo, under Tables, I have a Users table. Now I'll show you, before we start, that if I select the top 100 rows, you will see that there's no results. So the Users table is empty. What it does have is it has columns that match what's in my JSON. I have a name and an age. Okay? So going back to Azure and going back to my resource group, I'm going to now open up Data Factory, and we're going to set up a pipeline to copy that data. So in Data Factory on Overview, I will click on Author and Monitor. And I'm going to click on the main screen Copy Data. We'll use the Copy Data tool. Now under Properties, I'm just going to leave the task name default. And we're only going to run it once, so run once now. Click Next. Source Data Store. So my source is blob storage. So if I click Create New Connection, I choose blob storage. Click Continue. Now I need to give it some information. First I need to tell it what my subscription is. So my subscription, and then I have to give it my storage account name, which is Demo Storage 266. At the bottom I'll click Test Connection, and connection successful. So I'll click Create. And now I have a source data store. So if I click Next, now it says choose the input file or folder. So I'll click Browse. And I'm not going to choose a single JSON file. Instead, I'm going to choose the whole folder, source. And I will click Next. Now, for file format, I have to give it the correct file format. So I'll choose JSON format. And once I do that, you'll see at the bottom I get a preview. It shows me one of the JSON files, John Doe. And if I click Schema, it has picked apart the schema correctly. It knows the columns, name and age, string and integer. So I'll click Next. Now I need a destination data store. Now this is going to Synapse Analytics. So I'll click Create New Connection. Type in Synapse. Choose Azure Synapse Analytics and hit Continue. Now I need to fill in the details. So I'll fill in my subscription. Choose my server name, Synapse 266, and my database name, Demo. And then I have to enter my username and password. So I'll use the user that's set up when I first created my Synapse Analytics instance, which is SQL admin user, and I gave it a password that I use as a test. So I'll hit Test Connection, connection successful. So I hit Create. Okay, so now that's my destination data store. Now when I click Next, now we do table mapping. So we have to map the blob storage to the table in Synapse Analytics. I'm going to click Use Existing Table, and I'm going to choose the Users table, and I'll click Next. Now I get a screen that has name and age. So this name and age is from the blob storage. And if I scroll to the right, it asks me to map that to column names in my destination. So I'm going to map name to name and age to age, and I'll click Next. Now all that's left to do is to choose a copy method. Now I'm not going to do enable staging, I'm simply going to choose bulk insert, which is one of the easiest. It's not very efficient, but it's easy to do. I'll click Next. So you see on my summary, I'm going from Azure Blob Storage and I'm doing a bulk copy to Azure Synapse Analytics. And I'll click Next. And now validate, create datasets, create pipelines, and run the pipeline. And it's already finished. So I'll click Finish. So that's all there is to it. So let's take a look at what happened. Now if I go to Synapse Analytics and I go to Data, which I'm already at, and my demo SQL database is open, and my tables, my users, and so if I check top 100 rows for users, so now you see I have 4 records, which I would expect, 1 for each JSON object. Bob Dylan is 75, Alice Jones 18, John Doe 25, and Sarah Perkins 54. So in conclusion, I've shown how to bulk copy the contents of multiple blob objects from a blob container to a Synapse Analytics SQL pool, so the data is available for further analysis. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use Azure Data Factory to copy data from Data Lake to Synapse Analytics. Data Lake is a common big data store for data sets that are destined for offline analytics. So this combination of Data Lake as the data source and Synapse Analytics as a consumer makes a lot of sense. So here in Azure, I have a resource group already set up with some resources in it for this demo. So if I go to Data Lake Demo resource group, I have a Synapse Analytics instance, which is our destination. I have a Data Lake instance, which is our source, and I have the Data Factory instance to copy data between the two. Now let me show you my source first, Data Lake. Let me open that up, and I'll click Data Explorer. And I have a folder called Source. If I open up Source, I have 4 JSON objects that I've uploaded. Now let me just preview one of them. I'll right-click and hit Preview, and you see that it's a JSON object with a name and an age. So John Doe, age 25. And they all look like that. If I look at user 3 preview, it's Bob Dylan, age 75. So they all have the same schema, just different data. If I go back to my resource group and I go to the Synapse Analytics instance, I'm going to click on Open Synapse Studio. And on the left, if I go to Data, you'll see that I have one database set up. I call it Synapse DB. And if I open it up under Tables, there's a table called Users. So this is designed to be the destination for my source data. It has columns name and age. So if I go back, I'm now going to open the Data Factory, and I'm going to show you how you map this. So I'll click Author and Monitor. And I'm going to use the Copy Data tool. So I'll click Copy Data. I'm going to default the task name. I'm going to run it only once. Click Next. Now I need to choose a source data store. So I'll click Create New Connection. And my source data store is Data Lake. So I'll choose Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 1. Click Continue. Now under Subscription, I have to choose my subscription. And I have to choose my Data Lake Store account name, Data Lake 266. And now this is interesting. It needs a managed identity called Data Factory 266. That's the same name as my Data Factory instance that I'm updating right now. It has a managed identity that needs access. It says grant Data Factory Service Managed Identity access to your Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 1. Now I haven't done that yet. So if I hit Test Connection, so that connection has failed, and if I click on More, I see that the reason is permission denied. So the Data Factory instance does not have permission to talk to Data Lake. So I'll go back to Azure, and what I'll do is I'll give it that permission. Going to my Data Lake instance, I'm going to click Data Explorer. And on my source folder at the top, I'm going to click Access, and I'm going to click Add, and I'm going to add the access that is required. So first I have to select a user or group. So I'll click Select. And the managed instance for Data Factory has got the same name as the instance itself. So it's going to be called Data Factory 266. So I'll choose that and hit Select. And select permissions, I'll give it full permissions, read, write, and execute. And I'm going to add the permissions not just to this folder, because if I did that, it would have access to the folder but not the JSON files inside. So I'm going to say this folder and all children. And I'll click OK. So that has added an assigned permission to Data Factory 266. So now if I go back to my copy data tool and I click test connection again, now it's successful. So I'll click create. Okay, so my source data store is set up. Click next. And I have to choose a file or folder, so I'll click browse and I'll choose my source. And I'll click next. Now under file format settings, I need to choose JSON format. Okay, so if I look at the bottom here, I see the preview, name John Doe, age 25, and it knows the schema. So I'll click next. Now it needs a destination data store, and that's going to be Synapse Analytics. So I choose Azure Synapse Analytics, click continue. And I need to fill in the details. So the server name is Synapse 266. Database name is my Synapse DB. And I need to give it the username and password of my admin user. So that was SQL admin user. That's the user that was created when I created my Synapse database. And I'll give it my password and click create. So that creates my Synapse Analytics destination. Click next. Now I need to map the table, so I'll click use existing table, and I'll choose the users table in Synapse Analytics. Click next. And now I have to map the fields. So the fields in JSON are name and age from the source. And if I scroll to the right, I can choose my column names in my destination table. Click next. And what I'm going to do is just a bulk insert. I'm going to disable enable staging. And on copy method, I'm going to choose bulk insert and click next. So it's going to bulk insert from Data Lake to Azure Synapse Analytics. If I click next, so it does the validating and it's running the pipeline, succeeded. So I'll click finish. So now if I go back to Azure and I go to my resource group and then I go to my destination, which is Synapse Analytics, and I'll open Synapse Studio. Then on the left, I'll click Data, and I'll open my database, Synapse DB, and I'll open the tables. And on Users, I'll do a SQL script, and I'll look at the top 100 rows. And if you take a look, you can see the 4 rows, which represent the 4 JSON files. So in conclusion, I've shown you how to use Azure Data Factory to copy data from Data Lake into Synapse Analytics for analysis. So in this course, we've examined data ingestion and processing on Azure. We did this by exploring loading data strategies for Synapse SQL Pool, Azure Data Factory pipelines and activities, creating Azure Data Factory and using the Copy Data tool, using polybase, SQL Server integration services, and databricks to ingest data, and loading data with Azure Synapse Analytics and Data Lake. In our next course, we'll move on to examine Microsoft Power BI, including data optimization, data sets, dashboards, reporting, visualizations, and workflows.